Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon. It's the end of the year, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for being on the journey through 2019. It was a weird year, but through your support and listenership, it made it that much better. And I want to thank you very much for listening to Word Balloon as much as you do and making it a terrific year. You continue to inspire me and make me move forward with more interesting ideas. I've got a lot of plans for 2020. It's an important year. It's the 15th anniversary of Word Balloon come May. And I'm busting a move to trying to make Word Balloon a bigger and better thing. So thanks a lot for your support. Questions or comments about the show, reach me via email, john@wordballoon.com. Follow me on Twitter, @JohnWordBalloon, or on my Facebook page, John Sundress, and of course the Word Balloon Network page as well. Thanks for listening to the commercials. There might be one more before the show starts, but as always, I appreciate your attention and patience. Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Sundress here. Happy New Year. Hope everyone's going to have a great 2020. I am doing this in the closing hours of 2019, and I wanted to acknowledge a big anniversary that it's the 20th anniversary for one of the subjects that I'm bringing back today, and that's The Matrix. The Matrix was groundbreaking not only through its special effects and images, but my God, I mean, really at a time when $100 million was considered a successful movie, The Matrix made $463 million worldwide. Pretty amazing. Great performances in it. Lawrence Fishburne, Keanu Reeves, everybody in The Matrix was outstanding. And, the sequels you can judge on your own. They weren't the story I think we were all expecting, and maybe that's why some of them, just don't feel as good. But that said, I think the ideas expressed in the first movie were incredible. I'm a huge fan of the Animatrix as well, and also the old Matrix comics. And that brings us to our subject today, Geof Darrow, who worked very closely with the Wachowskis back in the day, and on several projects, including Speed Racer later in the 2000s. But and also got his own comics like Shaolin Cowboy, published by the Wachowskis' own Burly Man Comics imprint. Pretty cool, man. And Geof Darrow really talked a lot about secrets behind the scenes of The Matrix and conceiving some of the great images that still stand out today. And also we talk about his work with Frank Miller on Hard Boiled and Shaolin Cowboy, and just get a sense of Geof Darrow. It's one of my earliest Word Balloon episodes, and it's kind of outside what I was saying in terms of doing best of the decade stuff, but I realized that it was the 20th anniversary of The Matrix, and I feel like this is an episode that hasn't been listened to by some of the newer members of the Word Balloon audience, and you might appreciate it for its content. So a conversation with Geof Darrow about The Matrix, Hard Boiled, Shaolin Cowboy, and a lot more on today's Word Balloon. All brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you greatly, League, for your support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. It's the last day of the year, last day of the month, and I thank you greatly for your subscription. Word Balloon is free, but if you like what I do here, you want to help out the cause, I greatly appreciate all of you for your wonderful support through the years, League of Word Balloon listeners. A quick note, this conversation, of course, was recorded back in 2005, and well before the Wachowskis transgendered, and so any references to their past names or them as men is done contextually of the time and is in no way meant to be disrespectful. I hope that's understood. Now on to the conversation with Geof Darrow on today's Word Balloon.
Yeah, because I'd worked on the Matrix movies with them, and they'd hear me complaining about comic books and publishers and things. And I'd shown them. I'd started Shaolin Cowboy a long time ago, and it got interrupted because I went off and worked on that first Matrix movie. And then at the end of it, while I was working on it, I got tired of it. I thought, well, I don't know if I'll finish this Shaolin Cowboy thing, and I came up with this thing called Doc Frankenstein. So I always liked Doc Savage, and I thought, I'd sort of like to do a thing like Doc Savage, and that became Doc Frankenstein. And then it changed. It became this a little more political, and it sort of turned into a cross between Citizen Kane and Doc Savage, a little bit of, the Vatican and the American government not too pleased because he has his own sort of city-state within the United States, which sort of comes from, the whole Vatican being a city-state within Italy. And I thought the idea of having that in the U.S. would make the American government very uneasy. It was ceded to them by the American government for things that the hero had done to save America, but they still were like, just waiting for their chance to take it back. And so anyway, but then I decided I didn't want to do it. And then I started working on Shaolin Cowboy again, and then the other two movies came up, the two Matrix sequels. Mm-hmm. And I went off to do those. I'd talk about this Doc Frankenstein thing to Steve Scroce, who was the storyboard artist. He storyboarded, I would imagine, 80% of those, all three movies. He had an incredible amount of work. And he liked it, and he said, would you mind, can I do it? I said, sure, because I at that point I wasn't going to do it. And I'd kind of drawn him out, and we talked about it, and I told him my ideas, and then he started working on it. And about this point, at the end of the two Matrix movies, and they were about finished, the Wachowskis wanted to know if they could print them. They wanted to just sort of get into comics, because they had started out in comics. They had worked for Marvel on doing a comic called The Ecto Kid, and that's where they had met Steve. Steve Scroce drew those. To this day, I'm not so sure Marvel even realizes the guys that did Ecto Kid were the guys that did The Matrix. I think I got a feeling they're just kind of going, isn't it funny? We had a couple guys here called Wachowski, and they're just like those guys that did those movies. Because they would think they would reprint them. Just maybe I'm being very naive, and the fact is they've thought of it, but maybe there's something to do with Barker, where he owns the rights where they can't.
Okay.
I don't know.
We're going to bounce back and forth, and the only reason why I want to start with Shaolin Cowboy is it's the new product, and I want to give you an opportunity to inform people who haven't had a chance to pick up the book yet. I've read all three issues. I love it. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but I do still love it. I mean, loads of hardcore graphic violence, so there's plenty to love there. 3 is the most recent issue, am I correct?
Yeah, well, I've got 6 of them done.
Because you did, as you said, you started this a few years ago.
Yeah, and this is the oddest thing in comics. Generally, it's me. I'm always late. And Frank, work with Frank Miller on Hardboiled.
Yep.
And then when I worked on The Big Guy, I was pretty slow. But in this case, I have enough. But the guy that's late here is my colorist. And, it's an odd thing because I don't think that's new in comics. Generally, you don't wait on the colorist. But he's done a really beautiful job, but it's just hard to get the stuff out of him. So, the next one, he's almost done with it, and it'll come out probably the middle or towards the end of September. And the 5th and 6th one, I don't know, because he hasn't started them. So,
will this be a finite series, or is this...
No, it keeps going.
Okay.
It's sort of a weird kind of road trip thing.
There clearly is a history of this guy that's being hinted at. And also, I loved in the 3rd issue the various covers of previous volumes. You're on, volume 51 right now of...
Yes, yeah. And the sad thing about that, is that there will probably be people that think that there are... I have run that, because in Europe, I've done this before, and I did a book over there, and that's what those drawings are actually from.
Okay.
That featured this character. Because I used to love Tintin. And on the back of Tintin, they'd have all these, even in America, all these covers of previous issues. And I thought that was funny if I would just do a bunch of fake ones. But to this day, in Europe, there's still people that think that there's a whole lot, even here, that think that those are all books that were printed, and they haven't been. I mean, I've been in bookstores where people have come in and tried to order them, and they've gotten annoyed because... it says here, these are the other titles. Why can't I get them?
If you were to give someone a description of Shaolin Cowboy...
It's basically a Western, sort of. I mean, I've always liked Westerns, except, I think everything is a Western. I mean, Star Wars is a Western. I mean...
Absolutely.
I was a huge, I still am a fan of it, and I remember when they first announced it was in Time Magazine. They were talking about how the next big wave was going to be science fiction, and leading the way would be this movie called Damnation Alley. And then there was going to be this movie by this guy that had done American Graffiti, and they quoted Lucas in it saying, "It's a spaghetti western in space," and that always stuck with me because I love spaghetti westerns.
Absolutely.
And I thought, if I can, do something kind of like that. So because westerns, people don't like them, and in fact, when I talked to Frank Miller, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing this comic, and I'm going to call it the Shaolin Cowboy." He said, well, I'll give you a piece of advice. Don't put cowboy in the title because it'll scare people off. So I took his advice. The guys are like, well, that makes it like, yeah, because Frank, everybody was doing Sin City. Everybody told him it ain't going to work. You can't do crime comics. Nobody's going to be interested. And I think that sort of pushed him forward. Yeah, well, I'm going to make it work. And he did. And so I'm not saying that I've succeeded, but I'm trying. But it's only a Western. There's a lot of, obvious Western elements to it. But it's just it's a fantasy, and there'll be some science fiction elements to it. I just wanted to do something that allowed me to do whatever I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious, I think, and especially your first villain.
Well, see, that was not supposed to. That was only supposed to be like a 6-page preface to what is the third issue. And I started drawing it, and I kind of got away from me. And then I kept thinking, well, I gotta have a villain in here. I'd drawn, and there's this big long spread of 10 pages, where it's just all these guys that are waiting for him. And I'd just drawn a crab on the ground just for laughs. And I was thinking, who can I have him fight? And I got that crab in there, and I don't know. I just thought it would be really funny to have a guy fighting a crab.
A very adept martial arts.
Yeah. Well, he thinks he is.
Yes.
He has. Because I met a guy. Actually, he's kind of based on a guy that I used to work with at Hanna-Barbera who studied martial arts, and he was, pretty good at it. And I think he got into trouble with the police because he beat somebody up, and he was very adept, and he would try to show off. And, I'd watched and I'd read a little bit, and I always thought the whole object of knowing any sort of self-defense was that you wouldn't have to use it to show off. And this guy, I remember sitting watching, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and we'd go to this Japanese theater downtown and watch samurai movies. And they were showing martial arts, and they showed a guy breaking these bricks with his hands and stuff. And I said to him, can you do that? And he said, yeah, but I'd rather break heads. And I looked at him and I said, isn't that kind of against what they teach you? He goes, oh, yeah, you're right. And so that kind of is where the crab comes from, somebody that, he kind of went to that temple and didn't take anything away from it. But even they were not. Well, anyway, if you've read it, you'll see. You've read it, but if anybody else reads it.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away, and that's why I want to keep it kind of general, because people really, you ought to check this out. It's a very interesting book, and as always, wonderful art. And that's always been a hallmark of everything you do.
It's very nice of you to say. I've always had a hard time with my drawing.
Really?
I look at it, and I've looked at drawings I did 10 years ago, and I guess that wasn't so bad after all. And I sometimes be surprised. I'm surprised I actually was able to do that. Because I went to art school here in Chicago, and believe me, I wasn't anywhere near the top of the class. I was kind of the joke. But,
were there anybody else in your class?
Yeah, there was another comic book artist called Gary Gianni.
Absolutely.
And he's a very well-known children's book illustrator by the name of Scott Gustafson, and another gentleman named Rick Burnell, who's also a children's books illustrator. We were all very close.
That's cool.
And
Gary,
still are, yeah.
Gary, for people who don't know, currently doing Prince Valiant, and of course had great runs on The Shadow in the 90s for Dark Horse.
Right, and he's illustrated 3 incredible books of the works of Robert E. Howard. He did Brom MacMorn, King Kull, and he did Solomon Kane.
Okay.
King Kull's actually in the Brom MacMorn book, and he did one of the Conan. He did the only Conan novel that Howard wrote.
Well, let's keep bouncing back and forth. And first of all, prior to Hard Boiled, is there comic book work out there that we should be aware of?
Well, I did one in Europe, and I worked with an artist named Jean Giraud, who's known as Mobius.
Yes, of course.
And we were going to do a comic book together, but instead it turned into a portfolio called The City of Fire, and there were 10 very complicated drawings that I drew, and then he inked and colored them. That kind of put me on the map in Europe.
That guy's amazing. I'm a huge fan. Of course, his Silver Surfer was fantastic for American fans to grab onto. But certainly, heavy metal and things like that.
He's actually he's more famous over in Europe doing a Western called Lieutenant Blueberry, which they made into a movie.
Yeah,
horrible movie.
Yeah, with Richard Gere and.
Well, no, it's with what's his name? Well, a French guy actually.
Depardieu?
No, that day they wish it was actually a guy you probably never. Vincent Cassel.
Okay.
And Juliette Lewis is in it.
Oh, okay.
And Michael Madsen. If you can believe it, the end of it turns into The Matrix. It's just so weird. And actually, Giraud actually kind of liked it because it was more like Mobius than it was like his other artistic identity, Giraud, because it just turned into this acid trip at the end. And if you can believe, it's called Renegade, and it's out on DVD. You can see it, but it's really rough to watch. Wow.
And Giraud did an alternate cover for you for Shaolin
we've remained friends, and I asked him, and he did. I don't know if he ever. No, he's never. I don't think he's even seen a comic book. probably would regret having done it if he actually saw it.
How did you hook up with Frank Miller then for Hard Boiled?
Well, I had actually met him through Mobius because Mobius was living in L.A. and I was actually living in France at the time. But I would come back during the summer to Los Angeles, and I was in Los Angeles, and I went to Mobius's house. He's rented a house there, and he said, "Oh, Frank Miller's coming over." And I was like, "Wow," because it's Frank Miller, and I think, and because I was a big fan, and I went over to Mobius's house, and Frank came, and I don't think Mobius was even there, and so we got to talking, and this and that, and some time went by, and I'd call him from France every once in a while because Dark Knight had come out by then, and I called him up to tell him how much I liked it. And I don't think he ever really knew what it was I did, except it was with this guy that was over at Mobius's house. And one day he said to me, because I'd sent him the City of Fire thing in this book that I'd done, and he said, "You didn't tell me that you did this and this." He said, "I didn't realize that was you." And I said, "Yeah." And I moved back to Los Angeles about a year or two after that, and we became close friends, and we were walking in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, and he said, "Do you ever do, anybody else's material? So somebody wrote something for you?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "If I wrote something, would you draw it?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "Something with a lot of action." And that became Hard Boiled.
And Hard Boiled was before Sin City.
Yeah. I started it before Sin City, but I was working on that, and he was finishing up Electra Lives.
Okay.
And I think Sin City, I can't remember if it came out before or at the same time. But then he started that. And
did some of the ideas of Hard Boiled kind of inspire what led to Sin City?
I don't think so.
No?
Because they're two different things. I mean, I think I really frustrated Frank because I wasn't sure. I'd never worked with a writer, and I always kind of thought that when you were given a script, you kind of did what you wanted. And I would go off on these tangents, and because he'd given me that. I don't know if you've ever seen the comic, but the first issue, that was 10 pages of script.
Okay. And
I turned it into 30-something. And I remember doing them, and the first page it said, he's in an alley, and he's shot, and there's two dead guys laying at his feet. And then a car comes roaring down, and that's what he wrote. And then I turned it into this thing where he's standing there, all these dead guys everywhere, big giant car. He's like, "Holy smokes!" He goes, "What the heck?" And then I started drawing. I don't know if you've ever seen any of it, but things.
Yeah.
That big fat guy in the tub with all that machine with the babies in it and stuff. And he goes, "What the hell is this?" And I said, "I don't know." It's a nutritional machine. It keeps him alive. And okay, and it just kind of, and he wasn't supposed to. In the comic, the main character was called Nixon, but he's human. But I draw him doing all this. He says, "There's no one's going to believe this, that he could survive. We're going to have to make him a cyborg." And then he ends up being a robot,
right?
Because I draw that some of the license plates sticking out of his kneecaps, and he's all broken up and. There's no way a human could survive that. That's a comic book. Who cares?
Well, that's the great thing about your work, Geof, is you do. You break the rules all the time, and that's the beauty of comic books. I'm always amazed by people that will say, they've said to me, how can that mule talk? And I said, I don't know. And maybe he's like, exactly. Well, I won't tell you what. But there's a reason why he talks, but. Yeah,
bothers them. And I'll say to them, well, you read Superman? And, oh, yeah. That doesn't bother you? What do you mean? Well, this guy that can fly, how does he, I mean, if you think about it, I think a talking mule is probably a little bit easier to accept, but no, that bugs them. I find that really funny, because I've even been told I remember Archie Goodwin, I'd shown him this thing that I'd done, and, he said it was a lot of cosmic gobbledygook. And I said, to him, if you substituted what was going on there, just instead of it being, I don't know what it was some sort of radioactive cabbage or something. I said, if you substituted the cosmic cube, would it be okay? And he said, yeah. I said, so what's the difference? But, it's that whole, it's funny that guys that in comics that, you got these crazy superhero characters, it doesn't bother them, but as soon as you draw like a human being doing something a little odd, that just kind of, if that makes any sense, they can't get it.
Well, Frank must not have been that mad at you for Hardboiled, because you guys went on to do Big Guy and Rusty the Robot.
Yeah, we, no, he wasn't mad. I think it was just difficult, because he'd tell me, he said, Geof, I'd get those pages from you, and I'd just kind of stalk around the apartment for 2 days. What am I going to do with this?
Was the process then his script, your art, and then his dialogue? Is that how?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he would say he'd have to end up having to rewrite stuff. And I think it kind of happened to him, too, with Bill Sienkiewicz. When Bill was doing Electra Assassin, he would have a lot of pretty wild visuals in there. And it kind of threw him, too, because I think he wrote more complete scripts for Bill, because after a while, he just gave up. I would get just paragraphs. I mean, he would never see anything. Like, the Big Guy was only 3 paragraphs. And I went off and just drew it, and he saw it when it was done. And the same with, I would, hide stuff from him. I'm fairly insecure. And I think if I show this to anybody, they're going to say, what the hell is this? Stop. And I figure if I draw enough of it, it'll be just too late. And I was like, well, I'll have to, because that's the same sort of work habit on the Matrix movies. They never saw it, until I was done.
They had no idea what the Sentinels were going to look like until you were done.
No. I mean, they would know. They talked to me about it. They said, They'd tell me what they wanted, but I'd go off and, I told them, I said, I'm a little odd, and you can't look at my drawings until they're done. And they would not. They would not go into my room, and they would not let anybody else, even the producer, Joel Silver, they go, you can't look at what he's doing unless he says you can. And that's a very, Joel Silver is just this, like, human hurricane. What do you mean you can't? What do you mean I can't look at it? Yeah, that's just the way it works. And it used to bug him, and then after a while they all got used to it, and they would just let me go. And it was kind of risky, because some of these drawings that I would do for the Matrix would last. It'd take me a week or 2 weeks to do. And if it was if I was off, then that's 2 weeks down the drain. But it luckily enough never happened. I always sort of did what they wanted, and that was something Silver was just, I think, a little jealous of, because somehow we were wired together. We had the same sort of thinking about stuff.
You and the Wachowskis?
Yeah.
How early on in the process were you brought in to start conceptualizing a lot of their ideas?
Well, when they wanted to do The Matrix, the studio didn't understand it at all. And they had to, they said, we want to give us some money to bring some guys in here, and we'll draw it, and you'll see what we want to do. Because they couldn't figure, because they wanted to do a manga, an anime movie, superhero movie, and with Kung Fu. And at that point, Kung Fu literally was Steven Seagal.
Sure.
And the studios, because they at one point had tried to bring Jet Li in to get him into the Matrix at the very beginning. And they said, oh, this guy's horrible, The only guy that can really do convincing Kung Fu martial arts is Steven Seagal. and he was the guy, they were the guys that introduced Hollywood to Jet Li and all of, and that's how Jet Li got his start. Because eventually, they finally, even Silver finally hired him. So they wanted they wanted it to look different, and they were big fans of Hardboiled. And they had Warner's track me down. I was living in the countryside in France. They called up my publisher at the time, his Dark Horse.
Right.
And they said, we're looking for this guy, Geof Darrow. He wanted to work on a movie. And they said, who are you? And they said, well, you don't work with this guy because he's difficult. I found out this later. I go, that's nice.
Wow.
That's nice. But they didn't care. And they said, well, we want him in. The studio said, no, we don't want him. And Joel Silver did. And finally they said, if that's what you want, well, I'll get you this guy. So they tracked me down, and being the goofball that I am, they said, do you want to work on this movie? And I said, well, I'd like to read the script, because I don't know if I can do it. And if I read it, I think I can do it. Because it's a big mistake to try, maybe at the beginning, but it's just to do something to do it. If you can't do it right, it's really not worth doing it. In movies, people are dying to get into movies, and it's, if you go in there and you do a lousy job, then you get one shot at it, and you're out. I didn't want to just do it for the sake of doing it, and I'd done a little movie work at that point. And it's not always the funnest thing in the world, because you're not treated very well.
Would we know those other films before The Matrix?
No, none of them ever got made.
Okay.
One was a thing with Ridley Scott that never got made. So anyway, they sent me the script, and I thought it was brilliant, and I said, yeah. So they flew me out to meet with them, and they gave me some work to do. And the first thing I ever drew for them was this, those power plants, those big, with the people that are like light bulbs plugged into those towers. That was the first drawing I did.
Wow.
And they had described to me, well, they're kind of like petals, on a flower. They kind of go around the stalk, and I said, okay. I misunderstood them, and I drew these giant things. And I remember I faxed it to them, and they would laugh about it because it took the fax machine, I don't know, it's so long for it to finally, it was like tick, 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 because it was so dense.
Sure.
And I didn't hear from them for 3 days. I thought, well, that's it. I did a lousy job. And they finally called me up, and they said, we were shocked when we saw it, because that actually isn't the way we saw it, but it's worse than we would have imagined it to be. It's a lot more frightening, and they
Sure.
said that I was the guy for them, and that was so. Then I worked for 3 months on it, and that's all the money they had. And then about 3 months out, they called me up and they said, "Look, would you be willing to come out here?" They've given us some more money. And I went out and I worked another 3 months so that they could put this whole book together to go and show it to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers finally saw what it was they wanted to do, because we had done drawings of what became Bullet Time was. But there was one thing I drew that they didn't show them because they knew they'd freak out if they saw it. And that was what became known as the fetus field, which was those machines that were going through plucking those babies off the stalks because they thought they would freak.
Sure.
So that was one thing they didn't show.
And one of the best images of the film.
Yeah. But afterwards they got the money, and they didn't, because they were through the whole thing. They were trying to get stars to be in it, because the only way they get made is if they could get a star. That's how things work. And they have a list.
Sure.
You get this list, and it's like the first 15 guys are the guys. If you get it, you can get the movie greenlit. And then there's like the second tier. And I mean, they met with Leonardo DiCaprio.
That's interesting.
And it was right after, it was right before Titanic came out. And I understand it was his dad had wanted him to come in because his dad liked my comic books. His dad's name is George DiCaprio.
Oh, wow.
And he's a big comic book fan. And he said, you got to go in because they got this guy, Geof Darrow, working on it. And so he went in and he talked to him, and he really liked the script. And he said, I'd love to do it, except he said, I just did this movie called Titanic. And it was a special effects movie, and it was so hard. He said, I don't think I could do another one right now. And then the guy that really wanted to do it then, because there were some other guys I'm not going to mention that,
okay,
that I thought were really cool and turned out to be not so cool because they didn't understand it at all. And one of the guys that came in and wanted to do it was David Duchovny, and he was almost going to do it. And then they met Keanu, and Keanu understood it completely. And they crunched numbers, and they realized that a Keanu Reeves movie always at least breaks even.
Wow.
Because in Japan and a few other places, his movies always average a certain amount of money. So they knew if they had Keanu Reeves in this movie, they would, and they kept it at a certain budget, the movie would at least break even. And Warner's was really impressed, and Keanu wanted to do it, and that's when they got the green light.
They got a great start, and they got a full commitment because, I mean, there's a guy that's, been involved in every incarnation of The Matrix, whether it's the games or the...
Oh, no, and he worked. That guy works so hard. He has a work ethic that's amazing, because he would come in, he's talking about these guys, I trained for 3 weeks before I started. He trained for 6 to 8 months, and I'm not talking about going in, I mean, really, he'd be in there Saturdays and Sundays doing this stuff, going over and over and over. That guy, he's like De Niro in a sense. I mean, because he just puts so much into it, and he's so hard on himself, and he's a really, whether you like what he does or not, I mean, in terms of as a person, as an artist or an actor, he works really hard. Whether he pulls it off every time, I don't know. But he sure does try.
Do you know if there's any future plans? I know the computer game is alive and well, and obviously Burly Man keeps releasing the anthologies of stories.
They've always said when they because I mean, I don't know what people think of them, but they really were never in it for the money. And I mean, because they could make another one, or they could do this, or I mean, they were offered Spider-Man right after the first one, and they could have went off and done it, and they didn't. And they've been offered a lot of stuff, and they just didn't want to. And they've always said, if we run out of so we run out of our money,
Well, that's what
we'll go back and do another one. But
wow.
I mean, it pretty much. I mean, it's pretty much. I mean, it ends. I mean,
sure.
I mean, they could, but I would be really surprised if they did. I mean, we at one point talked about doing a comic book sequel, and they would write it, and we would draw it. But I don't know. I wouldn't say they won't, but right now they're working on V for Vendetta, which is kind of, considering the timing, is just kind of rough.
That's a really challenging project, and I mean,
considering what's going on in London, I mean, it's just really bad timing. And although it's not the same thing, it's still, you got a hero who's a terrorist, and
absolutely.
I think it's scheduled for February now.
Okay,
but I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Did you do any work for the film?
No. I was gonna, and then I don't know if you're gonna hear any Hollywood talk, but it's
absolutely.
They have in a movie. It's a European production, and when it's a European production, in order to get the tax break, you can have just so many non-Europeans working on it. Now, despite the fact that I'm living in France at the time and I'm a resident, I still wasn't considered European. And they said, Geof, you're bad spend. I said, well, I've known that all my life, but what do you exactly mean? And they said, well, they can only have so much bad spend on a film, and the bigger the position you have, the more of your bad spend allotment you use. And the director, whose name is James McTee, is from Australia, and you would kind of think that he would be considered, even he's not considered part of the European community, although Australia is a Commonwealth, he's Australian.
Sure.
So between him, the brothers, I mean, it really doesn't. That's not something that they would need me for, because I mean, it's not a fantasy film, and there's nothing really imaginary in it.
That's true, and they've got the graphic novel to be their conceptual Bible.
Yeah, and there's
Dave Lloyd's pretty good.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah. And he's really happy with it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I mean, everyone knows about the flap between Joel and Alan.
Well, there was, I think, I really respect Alan, and I think there's just been some cross wires, because I think Joel was misquoted. Believe me, I know Mr. Silver's capable of stepping on people's toes really easily, but in this case, I know he has nothing but a lot of respect for Alan Moore, and it wasn't. I think things were taken out of context.
Okay.
And believe me, I'm not trying to. I could give a rat's ass if Alan likes Joel Silver or not. I mean, but in this case, I think it's just a big misunderstanding.
No, that's cool. No, I appreciate your perspective on it. Before we leave the Matrix, I wanted to ask about the Animatrix.
I think it's, I know in Japan it's considered a huge landmark, because it really brought into America, brought to the forefront a lot of animators and stuff that had been, and it's really loved over there.
What's loved over here?
I was fortunate enough. I was just so well treated on those movies. I did the press tours for all three movies, and I got to go to Japan each time the movie came out. So I was there for these incredible premieres that just, it's a lifestyle stuff that I would never have been exposed to if I hadn't done these movies. And even, somebody in my position never gets to go. I mean, they never send a guy that drew pictures on a movie. I'm in Tokyo, and I'm standing with Keanu Reeves and there's 40,000 people screaming, and and you have to talk. It was surreal, and and they just love those. I mean, those movies over there, and they love Keanu, and they're just huge over there.
They're great movies, and I really think the Animatrix did a lot to get non-anime fans interested in anime.
Yeah, they had this whole idea when they did the sequels to do this multimedia thing where they'd have a cartoon, they'd have a video game, but that it was all stuff that they were heavily invested in. The brothers themselves,
mm-hmm.
they did a really good job. Because if you look at it, there wasn't a lot of merchandising on those movies.
Well, there
weren't 60 gazillion action figures. There weren't a lot of T-shirts. There weren't cola tie-ins, and there was no sort of Star Wars or Spider-Man blitz.
Well, there kind of was.
But that was because they didn't want to do it. What?
There kind of was for the last two, though, wasn't there? I mean, it seemed
the most of it was just like hype. There was a lot of
McDonald's and the fast food tie-ins and things like that.
There weren't any fast food tie-ins.
No. Okay, or soft drinks.
Nope. No. They had a thing with Heineken.
Well,
that was it.
That's not typical.
No, but that was a lot of it was when you make a movie. It was so expensive, you have to get money.
Oh, sure.
And a lot of people think a movie makes gosh, it made $100 million. Well, if you spend $100 million on a movie, you have to make 200 to break even, and that's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, how many times do you hear about the marketing budget, obviously more than overshadowing what the actual production budget was? So,
but there weren't a lot of, you didn't see like a line of clothes, you didn't see, there were some things, but not compare, like...
Well, yeah, Star Wars, yeah.
Star Wars or Spider-Man or... I don't know what other ones. There's a lot of them. They just, you can buy toilet paper with.
Well, luckily it was probably because they kept him R-rated movies too. And
no, it was them. They didn't want him to do it. They didn't want their fans to think that they were
selling
out and treating them like shit. They wanted whatever they did with the Matrix. They wanted it to be quality, and the Animatrix was the game. It was all real high quality.
No,
the game. They filmed. They were filming on the sets.
Yeah.
There's a separate movie in that game, which nobody had ever done. Now everybody's doing it, but they were the first ones to do that.
No, definitely. No, and and I'll tell you, as a boxing fan, I was glad to see Roy Jones get a little bit more screen time in the game.
Oh yeah, he came in, and they're big fans of him, so they wanted him in the movie. And I remember him coming into the studio, and they would always kind of laugh because at one point, John Milius had come into the studio, and they brought him in to meet me because they knew I was a big fan, and I had all these Western old pulp magazines and stuff, and he came in and he goes, "My God, where did you get the?" And we started talking about Westerns, and they're like doing the cut your neck thing because they had to get him out of there. And he's talking to me about all these old Western movies, and then when Roy Jones came in, and they introduced me to him, and we started. And I said, "So you like?" I said, "You like the movies?" He goes, "You like?" He goes, "Yeah, but I prefer Westerns." And they rolled their eyes up. I'm like, see what I tell you.
Let's stick with Westerns for a second, Geof, and I'll ask you who are your favorite Hollywood filmmakers that handled Westerns? Obviously Ford is
Ford, of course, Leone.
Sure.
And there was a guy called Bud Boddicker who did these movies with Randolph Scott that were just, they're very famous in Europe. They're very famous in France, which is where I saw them. And they're very small budget pictures that were just brilliant. They're really good. They're almost impossible to find on DVD or anything, but they're really, really beautiful little movies.
Is the Encore Western Channel? It seems like they
run them. They'll run them every once in a while. They did one that's based on an Elmore Leonard story called The Tall Tea. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's cool.
And I like Will Peckinpah.
Absolutely.
But Raoul Walsh has done some.
Oh, no question. Great Wayne films with Raoul Walsh, absolutely.
And the really old, if you watch any of the really old Gunsmoke, the half-hour episodes were brilliantly written, and some of them adapted by Peckinpah. And
that guy, John Meston, the guy who wrote
Gunsmoke. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of the Gunsmoke radio show.
Yeah, me too. And they did I'll go back and forth between. I prefer the radio show to the TV show.
Me too.
But I mean, I loved it. You've seen the have you ever seen the Anthony Quinn where William Conrad plays finally gets to sort of play Matt Dillon. They took one of the Gunsmoke scripts and they produced it as a movie.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
It's called The Ride Back. You can find it on DVD, and
I will look for that.
And it's William Conrad playing this marshal, and it's him sort of getting to be, although he's not the same, superhuman guy that he is in the TV show.
Well, and Arness did a great job on the TV show,
yeah.
and the TV show is wonderful. There's a reason why it lasted for 20 years, obviously. But, there's that chemistry between William Conrad and Parley Bear, and Conrad was just what a commanding voice. And it's a shame. It came at the end of radio, and it's such a great example of good audio drama. It's just such a well-produced show.
Well, there's a few of them, like there's one called Frontier Gentleman.
Yeah, with John
Diner. It was just brilliant. Same guys. They all worked on another called Fort Laramie.
Yes.
With Raymond Burr.
Yes.
And those were great. I mean, they're just very,
Well, that was the time of the 50s Westerns, and that was the resurgence of the more cerebral Westerns, I think. Well, let's return to some of your work and talk for a second about Big Guy and Rusty the Robot. Clearly influenced by Astro Boy and the Toho films, and I thought just a neat collaboration, and certainly a 180 from what you guys did on Hard Boiled in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, I'd wanted to do a superhero, and I always liked robots and stuff, and the Metal Men and Gort from The Day the Earth Stood Still, and Iron Man, and I wanted to do something like that, and Frank said, well, we can do it, and we'll do this thing, and we came up, and he originally was just the big guy, and then he was going to be fighting this thing in Japan, and I thought it'd be funny if you had this little, the Japanese national hero, their Superman is Astro Boy.
Absolutely.
And I thought it'd be funny if he shows up and he has to fight Astro Boy, because Astro Boy, the Japanese don't want him there. We take care of we fight our own fights, and sort of an American imperialism. We're like, we got to stop this thing. We got to nip it in the bud, because if it gets out of Japan, it's going to that whole thing. But I mean, it changed. But that was my take on it, and I drew it, and Frank liked him so much, the drawing I did of him. He said, well, can we make him his sidekick? I said, sure. So there was no longer going to be a big fight between those two. It was just going to be, he said, have him, he shows up, but I mean, he just gets flattened. And the whole idea of it is, and we never did it, was, if we ever did any more, was he was going to get destroyed every story. And the big guy doesn't really like him. He kind of tolerates him. And the Japanese government were so indebted. They have, much about Japan, but they always had this. They're so indebted that they would just keep rebuilding him. and it's not necessary, but we rebuilt him, and like I said, every one he would get destroyed. But Frank really liked writing that character.
Are there any DVD plans for the series? Is it available?
No, I don't. That's a really odd. It did well.
Yes.
Fox Kids program is run by a guy, and he owns every piece of the shows, except that one when it was on. And he said, give me a piece of it, or, I'll bury it. And they said, well, we're not going to give it up. And he did bury it.
Wow.
And it's so, because it moved around the schedule. When it was on, it did well. And so finally, they pulled it off, the schedule. I mean, they had big plans for that thing. They had Bandai was doing toys, and they had a Wendy's tie-in, and they did the toys. And it's real funny, because you go to Wendy's, you see these displays for this character that nobody knew what the heck it was, because it was only on for 4 weeks before they yanked it.
Wow.
And the same thing, the toys, Bandai just pulled them. They did some, and they pulled them. They said, nobody knows what this thing is. There's no tie-in. You promised us a tie-in, and we don't have it. And so they yanked it, and then they had to fill in the summers that they either had to run them, or they would lose their rights to them. So the guy finally programmed them, and they did really well. And but they said, well, we got enough of them. We'll just keep running these over and over and over.
Wow.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I've only seen one episode of it.
Okay.
Because I had very little involvement with it, because they really wanted to change it at the beginning. It was like RoboCop. He worked for some corporation in a city, and I said, that's not what he is. He's he's an army man. He's a big metal G.I. Joe. He's he's not like me. He's very right wing, and he's just and he's that. And they, we won't like this. But to their credit, the creative people of Fox said when they took it to him, the studio, Sony took it to him. They said, "No, we like this comic book. If it's not the comic book, we don't want it." And so they changed it somewhat, but because they wanted him to be a robot. And I said, "He's not a robot. He's a guy in there."
Right.
And I said, he's in there and he's driving it like a car. He's got a steering wheel, and there's a stick shift. And I said, there's a Coke machine and a candy machine behind him. So there's air conditioning in there because it overheats sometimes. And I was describing all, and they go, well, that they didn't like that at all. And eventually they did put it in there, but they changed that quite a bit. But so I didn't have much to do with it, except I did a few monsters for him. I mean, to such an extent that they were showing it in France, and my daughter had it on television on Sunday morning, and there was this cartoon show on, this big monster thing, and I thought, this is pretty cool, and I sat down to watch it, and I was watching, and I thought, this is really well done. And the wall breaks open, and in comes the big guy. They're, holy smokes! I said to my daughter, that's your father's cartoon show. But that's not, like I said, that one and the pilot episode, which they showed at the San Diego convention before it opened, are the only ones I ever saw.
Wow. And I almost wonder if DC took...
Oh, they did. Oh, they did. And you know what they said? Because I know some in an editor, they talked about it. He said, well, they're not doing it, so we might as well.
Okay, so that's where Stars and Stripe came from.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's just that sort of, I hate that kind of crap.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, nothing's new. I mean, it wasn't new, but
sure.
Come on. I mean, if you want to do something, then do something like it, but put your own spin on it. I thought that was a pretty, and I think I knew the guy that was writing it too. But
I know Geoff Johns was the guy who wrote it, but I don't know if he's the one who came up with it.
I just.
No, I understand. No, man, hell, I don't blame you.
I mean, nothing's new. I mean, nothing I do is ever new, but you put your own spin on it and try to. I mean, there's a big debate in comics, and I think there's a lot of people that swipe people's artwork. I mean, they just copy it, and everybody does it. I said, well, I don't do it. I do not like it when people copy my drawings. I'm not talking about stylistically, because everybody has their influences, and I certainly have mine. But when somebody sits down with a piece of tracing paper and copies a drawing and puts it and sells it to somebody, for me, that's piracy. But I've had guys come up to me and say, man, I really like what you do, and I was swiping one of your drawings, but it was too damn hard, so I just traced it. And I was like, the guy was really proud of himself, and I kind of went, well, thank you.
Yeah, I guess.
What do you say?
Yeah, and you'll hear from my attorney.
No, you can't. You can never win. You can't win a lawsuit like that.
No, I understand.
Impossible.
No, and I don't mind light boxing, and I know that's a current debate going on too.
I don't.
Okay, well, all right.
What do you mean? What do you say by light boxing? What do you mean?
Well, I guess that's the gray area. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, when you say light boxing, what are you talking about?
Well, are you starting with a photograph and then coming up with a drawing from a photograph? That's I guess what I like. I know.
Well, no, I mean people do that. I mean,
Sure.
that's it. Generally, that stuff comes off pretty stiff. That stuff, I don't think people can do whatever they want. When we say light boxing, I thought you're saying they take like a Neil Adams drawing and they trace it, and they put a mustache on it instead of, and
sure.
They take the ears off the Batman cowl, and that stuff I don't like.
No, and I agree
lazy.
with you. But yeah, I mean, I'm talking about artists like Greg Land and Tim Bradstreet that start with photorealism, and Tim is a guy that takes his own photographs, obviously, and then draws from those. I mean, he has his own models.
People can do whatever they want. It's just. If you're too photo reliable, at least in my opinion, and the opinions are worth exactly what they cost. It's just because it's boring, and I see there's a lot of comics that do that. You can tell when they're doing it, and they're just boring because they when somebody goes to throw a fist or throw a punch or they're jumping through the air or whatever it is, it's not exciting because they can't. You can't do it. You can't get somebody to jump up and take a decent enough photo, so it's always a sort of stilted,
bit of action.
At least in my opinion, but anyway.
No, I respect that. Let's talk about your collaborations with Andrew Vax, another 180 from this other work. You have really collaborated with some really interesting writers and very distinct writers, and certainly Andrew Vax, who transcends crime and comics with the subjects that he writes about. Given all of your other work that is so violent and in a lot of ways fantastic, here's a very real subject that you've drawn. in these books, things like Another Chance to Get It Right and Halfbreed and...
Well, he had told me that because I'd heard him on this show called Fresh Air.
Oh, sure, the NPR show.
Yeah, and he was talking about it, and I thought, wow, this guy really sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And I thought he was really interesting, and I wrote down the name of his, book, and I was going to buy it, and I forgot about it. And of all things, I was in this store, and I was walking by the cooking section, and there's this book, and I don't know what, and I turned, and it was his book. Now, what his book was doing, somebody had picked it up and just left it there. And I go, that's that guy that was on the radio. And otherwise, I probably never would have found it. But I bought it, and I read it, and I thought it was amazing. And it just rung so true, and it talked about such important stuff. And I remember talking to the people at Dark Horse, and they'd turned me on to Silence of the Lambs, which I thought was really great. I said, we got to read something really great. I said, read this Andrew Vax book. I mean, it'd make a great comic book. And so they read it, and they said, yeah, and they got hold of him. And he went out there to see him, and he told me that when they showed him stuff that they're capable of doing, they showed him hard-boiled. Mm-hmm. And he thought that was what everybody did. And so they kept showing him, when they went to do this series with him, they kept showing, they go, where's that hard-boiled guy? I thought that's the guy I want.
That's cool.
And they were going to do Another Chance, and I'd said I'd do a story in it, and they gave it to me, and I called him up, and he's a very intimidating man, because
sure.
He's not just physically, but just intellectually, because the man's a genius. I mean,
yeah.
He's like a human computer. I mean, there's nothing he doesn't know about. Or for me, he's like a superhero. He's like Doc Savage. I mean, he can do anything. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, this guy, his knowledge base is just amazing. And I called him up, and I'd ask him these questions about, because he's very, when he writes something, he wants it to be exactly that.
Sure.
And I call him up, and I said, well, you want a Plymouth, what kind of Plymouth is it? And we got to talking, and little by little, we became close. I mean, really, really close. Now, this is a term I use, brother. I mean, there's genetic brothers, and there's, although we're not related, blood-wise. I mean, he's part of my family, and he's done a lot of things for me, and I've become very involved with his work because I think it's really important.
It is.
But I'm really proud to be able to say that. I bring it up because I'm very proud of my association with him, because he's one of the few people that I've ever met that has done a lot of good for the world. And, as corny as that might sound, but it's true.
No, it is true, and he
still does it.
Absolutely, and no, they a wonderful work. Also, wonderful work on Cross as well.
Yeah. Well, that was something they didn't want me to. He always wants me to draw it, and I said I'm too slow, and we always talk about doing something, but and maybe we will, but I hope so. But he wanted me to draw the characters and the covers, and I don't think I did a very good job. But I've never really been happy with anything I've done for him, because he's so intimidating that I get intimidated by it. It just seems like I can't.
Well, I enjoy the collaborations. I think they're great.
I appreciate it. He just amazes me. He was. They did a Batman, and I was supposed to draw that. And I was
the Ultimate Evil, yes.
Yeah, and something came up because they of course wanted it really, really fast, and I said, well, it'd take me this long to do it. And I never heard back from them, and they just turned it over to somebody else.
Because I've read the novel.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And I didn't read the graphic novel. If it
it's like when I read the novel, I was amazed. I said, well, how much? Do you know about? Because he seemed to know the Batman thing pretty well. And I was surprised because I'm always surprised he knows so much stuff. I go, because he deals with things that are so serious and
sure.
horrible and real. I mean, not like the Joker and all that crap, but I mean like real monsters.
Yes.
And whatever Batman has to deal with is almost insignificant in a way, because it's all, I'm going to, get all this money from Gotham City Bank or whatever the hell it is. But him, I mean, it's just, and he managed to work it in there, and it's just, wow. And he knew all. I mean, it's just amazing. You know all about the Bat Cave and the Batmobile, and it's funny to me.
And he clearly was a fan. I mean, or
he's not at all. So that's the amazing thing.
So he just did research for it.
Well, not that much. He just talked to somebody. He just sort of can put two and two together and say, well, this guy does this and does this because of this. And I know he got a lot of flack because I think, as I remember in the novel, I think his mother was working with abused kids and this and that, and you messed with the Batman mythos. And, I think Denny O'Neil was up in arms. And,
that's too bad.
And he said, well, the only way that this thing can be printed is if you say it's a Batman Elseworlds novel. Like, you wouldn't allow that horse shit. Anyway, can you say horse shit on the radio?
Yeah, well, this is the internet, Geoff. You can say anything you want, man. That's okay.
Cool.
So right now you're working on Shaolin Cowboy,
yeah.
And are there any other projects you've got, or is Shaolin quite the handful?
Well, it is a handful, but I do other things. I mean, little illustrations here and there, and I just moved, so I haven't worked in a long time because all my stuff is somewhere in America. I think it's on a train headed here, and I don't know. Last I saw of it was in Paris, France, on the 30th of June, and we're almost at the end of August, and it still isn't here yet. It got held up in customs, and from what I understand, they thought they saw something suspicious because they Xeroxed the container, and they were going to take it off and go through everything. And I guess they did, because I know it cost me a lot of money, because I had to actually pay for it. I had to pay for them.
That's pretty lousy.
Yeah.
I mean,
but at the same time, I'm happy that they are actually, because who knows,
Sure.
But the problem with being, a comic book and an artist and a collector is that I got a lot of stuff that probably would look kind of funny if you X-rayed it.
A lot of suspicious drawings.
Well, yeah, or anything can look like a bomb these days.
That's true.
If you have like a vacuum cleaner in there, they don't know.
Now, how is it as an expatriate coming back, and not that you left under many Roman Polanski circumstances, but but I'm saying as someone that did come back after spending a long time in Europe, what's it like being back in America now?
It's everybody in France is just like, geez, you're such a great thing. Get out of here, because I mean the mood in France is so bad. It's just everyone is so depressed because there's just this sense of things are just going to get worse and worse. And despite the fact that, politically speaking, the climate here is, it's gotten really weird.
Yeah.
It's still a place where you can get things done and things can change. France has a hard time with change. They want to change, but they don't want to give anything up. And sometimes you just have to give up some things to make things better, but they just don't want to sacrifice it. Living in Paris was getting really, really hard because just people are so fed up that the least little thing. I never saw so many fist fights. Just people, motorists getting in fights with each other. I just thank God they don't have guns over there.
Wow.
Because it would, they'd be going at it. It would be like a Western over there.
Well, welcome back, and here's hoping that things get a little bit better, and as far as what's going on here in the country.
Yeah, things can. I'm always optimistic, although I don't know why. Because I still can't fathom that last. In the very beginning, I can't understand why they didn't want his dad. Why they wanted his son, For whatever he is, his dad at least sort of did something, He was a pilot, and, he's sort of and the son just seems like somebody that just kind of do.
Yeah.
And if they rejected the father, why do they think the son would be any better?
Well, unfortunately, I think the producers of South Park got it right when they said you're choosing between the giant douche and the shit sandwich. and take your pick in terms of who won, unfortunately. I mean, I think
I'd rather have a douche.
I voted for the douche, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, a douche in French means a bath. I'd take a bath over a shit sandwich any day.
I'm with you.
So,
well, Geof, I've taken you over an hour, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I will say I really appreciate the talk tonight.
I appreciate your interest, and anything to promote Burley Man, because it's a rough market out there, and
well, you've got
what we've done isn't exactly it's a typical comic book fair, so, although it is, but
no, but they're two distinct properties, and yeah, people check them out. Doc Frankenstein, co-created by Geof, and his personal baby that's running, Shaolin Cowboy, issue 4 coming out in the middle of September.
Action packed.
And
28 pages of solid action.
And a talking ass. What more can you want?
Yeah, I think that's me. as anybody who's been listening to this now knows.
No, we appreciate it, Geof. Thank you.
Okay.
There you go, Geof Darrow. Great conversation. He is shy. I mean, he's a great guy to talk to at cons, but I've been begging him. I only had him on one other time, and ever since then, he's been very reluctant. And he's like, "Oh, we had our good conversation. That's cool." It's there's no obligation to come back to Word Balloon, and as long as he's still happy to see me and talk to me at conventions, that's cool. His daughter's become quite a great artist as well, and as we talked about, Big Guy and Rusty the Robot and Hard Boiled and so many other great things that Geof has been involved with. And what an influential artist! I think one of the more influential artists that, unless you really talk to a lot of current comic book artists, he doesn't come up in the conversation the way that some of the other all-time greats do. But I just think such an interesting man in his works, and also as a guy. And I'm really pleased to have gotten to know him over these last few years. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Geof for today's Word Balloon to close out 2019. Thanks a lot for your support this year, everybody, especially the League of Word Balloon listeners via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. That's where you can go if you want to subscribe to Word Balloon. But as I said in other episodes, I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen in 2019. I started off with that infection that is almost done. I know I keep saying that, but this is what the doctors tell me as well. So I'm hopefully in the closing weeks and months of dealing with it. They said it would take a year to really fully recover, and I'm hoping to put it behind me and get my health in order, doing everything I can to make that happen. And but this was a very great year for me creatively, and I do look forward to some ideas that I will be pursuing in 2020. So I thank you for your attention and your patronage, all of you, and all I can say is watch out 2020, because Word Balloon's going to have a hell of a year as we enter our 15th year. May 10th will be the 15th anniversary for Word Balloon. I can't believe I've been doing this for 15 years. Nothing's stopping me. I've kind of lost count on where I am in the episode count, and I really don't usually acknowledge anything more than anniversaries. And again, May 10th is when I started, so it's a big one. I am amazed. But nothing's really stopping me from doing Word Balloon. I still find it fascinating to talk to creators and creative people in pop culture, and it's a journey that I haven't exhausted my interest yet. And I hope yours interest hasn't been exhausted either. But thanks a lot. And really great feedback on the last couple episodes. I'm glad everybody enjoyed the Rise of Skywalker talk with Art and Franco and Skokie Spidey. We had a lot of fun doing it. And again, if you like that kind of stuff, check out our other podcast, the Aw Yeah podcast, where those conversations happen all the time. But thanks again for listening. Until next time, Happy New Year. Word Balloon for the last time this year is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2019.